the moment we are in a, which is why I chose this topic for today, for this week. You probably have all heard about Mercury retrograde, and there is another bad thing about consumer astrology, I like to call it, where Mercury retrograde is coming, something bad is expected about communication and technology and so on. No, nothing like that. There is nothing good or bad. There are certain periods of time because when planets are retrograde, what does it mean? All the planets are moving constantly. They are revolving around the sun as we are revolving around the sun, in different speed, but they are. And the birth chart is a still image where they were when we were born, but then they continue moving after we were born and constantly moving. And at the moment, they are somewhere as well. And the planets, none of the planets ever starts moving back. It never changes its direction really, in fact, astronomically. They all going in the same direction all the time around the sun. But what happens is, like, if you're traveling on a train or in a bus or in a car and you pass a car which is stopped, there is this visual illusion that the car is moving back, that other car. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So what happens in a certain for 6 weeks every 2 years, which is the shortest time a planet does that, Venus does this with us, with the Earth. We start being a little bit faster than Venus, because Venus is at that point very slow moving. Then we pass it. We simply pass it on its track. And to us on Earth, if we observe it, it appears that Venus is moving backwards. What is actually happening is that we are moving slightly faster than it. So that period, and we are now in that period, started in the 6th of October and will end in the middle of November. This is the shortest period a planet ever goes retrograde. That has a psychological meaning. I'm telling you that not just to give you another piece of useless information, but among all the planets, that one, because it's about relationships, it's about our capacity to relate, and all of those things that I said about Venus. When it is retrograde, these topics become accentuated with everybody, with some people more than with others, because some people have this planet not only is retrograde, but it's also in a sign, and when it moves back and then it will start moving forward again, it passes through certain signs of the zodiac. In our case, in this particular time, it's Libra and Scorpio. So people who have a lot of Libra, a lot of Scorpio in their charts, or are particularly sensitive to those energies, they would live out this period of Venus retrograde a lot more dramatically than others that don't have that, which is why it can vary. But generally, there is it's like in the weather forecasts, in the emotional weather forecast. So in this period of time, there will be this tendency to concentrate on relationships. And there is so much scaremongery about Venus retrograde, like with Mercury retrograde. It's saying don't get married during Venus, or don't enter into a relationship, or don't sign contracts. Because another thing I didn't mention is that Venus is also about money and possessions, and that comes from the Taurus side of it, not the Libra side, because Taurus is about material possessions, value, putting value into what you have, and also your sense of own value. Like Venus is a lot about how we perceive ourselves, whether we like ourselves or we don't. If we don't like ourselves, especially women, they would have low self-esteem. If the Venus is underdeveloped, or there are people born with Venus retrograde in their charts, which happens not very often, but they are. And what then dysfunction becomes internalized. It's not that much out, it's more in the internal life. And this is what this period wants from us now, to evaluate, to look into our past relationships, to analyze, to close accounts where accounts need to be closed. But it is expected to be a very impulsive period, where things can happen, which we can do things which we regret later, because not only the planet is retrograde, but it will make an aspect to Mars, none other but to Mars, which is a square. that crossing paths thing that I was talking about. So not every time we have Venus retrograde, it makes an aspect with Mars. It's just an added circumstance in this case, in this period. So impulsiveness, there may be a lot of anger in relationships. There may be a lot of things happening which you kind of go out of yourself in a way that you say, that's not me. After the conflict passes or something, you kind of realize you've gone out of your normal way. That can happen now. Um, they say in many magazines and popular articles about Venus retrograde that your old love can come back, like your ex can call again or something like that. Well, this is because this is internalizing of the relationship function and attempting to think about this. That's probably what triggers many people to pick up the phone and call their exes. I don't know, but there is something like that going on, and it tends to have bad results because we are emotionally in a mood which is not our normal mood, and we're not capable of making rational decisions. At least that's what it's claimed. You can take that as seriously as you want. I don't think that this is very exclusive. I think, yes, there is something like that. Yes, marriages that have been, signed, weddings happening into this period tend to dissolve because, but maybe the decision about that marriage was made a very long time ago, and people just tied the knot in this period. And this is not the same effect as if they decided to get married in that period. I think the effect is more if you decided to make a long-term commitment, because Venus is about what I would want to commit to also. If you have decided to make a commitment, sign a contract, marriage is just one type of contract if we look at it in this way, then it's likely that you would change your mind. And that's why it dissolves later. Or one of the parties will change or just feel in a different way after that period passes. Uh, when a planet is retrograde, whatever it stands for shouldn't be pushed out to be actionable very much. You shouldn't want to do a lot of things outside in the world, but rather give yourself rest and time to think about it or evaluate it without committing to action. After that period has ended, and that's why these periods are given to us psychologically, is to learn to not do and work and act all the time. That these kind of recuperation periods where we have to slow down, really, so that we can act better later. Because if we act all the time, we lose our energy. It doesn't have a source to feedback. So questions about value of yourself, self-assertiveness, who I am. A lot of depressive periods start with many people during Venus retrograde because you start asking, as a difference to other periods, more yourself. Do I look good? Am I liked? Who likes me? Who I like? Things like that. They appear in the surface and become sensitive topics. Just be aware that it's exaggerated. This period tends to exaggerate this more than it's actually important. Assets, again, what I possess, clean the house, kind of get rid of things that are not serving anymore any good, are clogging the space. That's a great period for that. To look at, like, for example, Monse can look at her shop and say, okay, what is it that I want to get out and which items I want to keep? And we order maybe the interior of the house or something like that. We order your clothes, like things like this. And maybe finally, what is my relationship to beauty and aesthetics? Like that. Also taking care of myself, of the body, of the, both the physical aspect and the aesthetic aspect of it. So, okay. Well, that's pretty much it. I'm surprised I managed to go through. Thank you. Do you have any questions before we go? I'm starving for coffee. I don't know if you. Anything that comes to mind, or we can just.
I'm interested about the retrograde because you hear so much of it says when it's Mercury. Is it always the same? Is it always a negative occurrence, whether it's in Virgo or depending on which house or sign it's in? Is it always going to be a negative time? Because obviously I've heard it before, but
Mhm.
I've never looked into it.
It's they say it's a negative time because it disturbs the normal flow of work. And our society nowadays is so concentrated on efficiency that Mercury retrograde is particularly problematic because what happens during Mercury retrograde are things like the computer stop working, the printer breaks down. I'm trying to how can I say, communication doesn't work. There are lots of things that prevent natural flow of communication, like telephone calls, mix up messages. You say one thing, they understand another, slowing down of business, basically. And who wants that? And that's why people fear that period because, oh, now Mercury retrograde, everything is going to go, this is because we don't have any mechanisms in our society to, maybe later on we'll be more in tune with this. And rather than having Saturday and Sunday as holidays, they may say, okay, business stops in the Mercury retrograde period because it must stop. It is meant to stop because we're not meant to work in that period and to do things out and trying to do things out. We're meant to order, to put our mind in order. Mercury is mental, it's communication, intellect, and so on, rather than feelings and relationships. So what needs to happen in Mercury? It happens more often. This happens Venus only once every 2 years for 6 weeks. While Mercury retrogrades happens 3 times a year for 1 month, which is like 1/3 of the year. We have no 1/4 of the year. Excuse me, 1/4 of the year we have Mercury retrograde, which is like being thinking about what I believe in, what I what kind of information I want to get in or give out. These
but if
sort
you
of
look at it
questions.
differently from a sort of healthy rather than judgmental perspective, it's just, this is how we should live our lives. At least
Exactly.
a quarter of your time, not just 2 hours.
Yeah, if you're
days,
accepting.
you should be reflecting, meditating,
Yeah,
reading,
if you know
whatever.
what it's about, if you know what's happening. And this can give you some sort of perspective of what's happening. When the printer breaks down, you can be mad as you want to be, but at least you understand that there is a certain dynamic that you're not able to control. We are not able to control everything all the time. Things like that probably teaching us that the energies in the universe are also not flowing consistently. They have their peaks and they have their, and when you, there is in astrology, predictive astrology is based on that. I don't concentrate on it very much because very little can be actually predicted with astrology. Very, very little. Apart from major life cycle changes and crises and personal things, which are, I can tell you what sort of thing can happen, but I can never say what exactly can happen. But the transits in astrology, transits are the moving planets, where like Venus retrograde is one moving planet, which now is moving slowly, then backwards, and then we'll move back. So we are looking into its movement. The same way, if we look into the movement of all the other planets and place them over the chart, the birth chart, we can say what's happening to that person at the moment and what was happening in the past and in the future eventually, how the universe was impacting the integrity of that person and or is impacting at the moment. Because you can think of the birth chart as your integrity, your personality, which always gets bombarded by the constant change in the environment, which is the transits. And the transits are, some are very hard transits, when a particular outside planet like Pluto or Uranus happens to touch a sensitive point in your chart, go over it or opposite or something like that, a major crisis will happen in your life. It will externalize into an event. An event will happen because it needs to express itself. But whether, in certain very, very small cases, it happens internally. The person is changed completely, but not because something happened, but because some internal process, but still that was the same thing. And if you come to me and I see that Uranus is exactly on your sun at the moment, I should say something about that and what you can expect roughly, but I could never say, well, you're gonna break up with your partner or something like that. There can be a big transit in the seventh house of relationships, which will tell me that there will be a very big change in your relationship dynamic, or something will happen. There will be a challenge, there will be a crisis. That crisis can get resolved to the two partners getting even closer together, or it can get resolved by them splitting. I have no means to know, only through astrology, what you're going to do. It's your choice at the end of the day. But it's like a clock, which says, now is the time to concentrate on this. Now in 5 years, it's the time to concentrate on that. And you want it or not, life is going to make you concentrate on that. You see? That's the way it works.